Echo stopped so fast, the leash snapped tight in Marcus's hand. The dog's hackles lifted nose, cutting the wind that rolled off the black edge of the cliffs. Waves slammed the rocks below with a hollow, booming rhythm carrying the reek of salt and seaweed. Somewhere out there, metal clinked against stone. Echo whined once, then gave 3 sharp barks his old search, and rescue alert the one he never used lightly. Easy boy, Marcus murmured, but his pulse was already racing. The tide was surging and swallowing beach and daylight by the minute. Echo lunged toward a half-buried shape in the rubble. Something beneath the rocks moved. Echo's paws skidded over the loose shale as he pulled Marcus closer to the edge. Wind tore at their jackets, flinging grit into their faces. Below the waves rose and fell in heaving breaths, each crash erasing more of the narrow ledge. Marcus steadied himself, dropping to one knee. The buried shape glinted faintly, metal-old, and wedged deep between 2 fractured boulders. Echo circled it, nose trembling, tail rigid. Whatever it was, it carried scent enough to jolt the dog into full alert. "Not debris," Marcus muttered. "Someone planted this." A sudden gust hissed through the ravine, carrying the unmistakable thud of hurried footsteps retreating uphill. Echo spun, growling low, gaze locked on the dark trail above them. Marcus shifted his grip on the leash. "We're not alone out here." Above the cliffs, a figure paused just long enough to silhouette against the fading sky, then vanished into the pines. Echo barked once sharp as a command. Marcus rose, mud on his palms, heart drumming. If someone was watching the homestead this closely, if they were planting things on his land, then what else had been left behind? The inland road curved away from the cliffs in long, quiet bends, carrying Marcus and Echo toward the property, with the slow inevitability of a tide returning home. Pine needles coated the dirt path in a soft amber carpet, and every step released the sharp, resinous scent that defined this lonely stretch of coast. Echo trotted ahead, now tail lowered but calm, periodically glancing back as if checking Marcus's pace. The dog's earlier tension had faded, replaced by a steady watchfulness Marcus had come to rely on more than his own instincts. They passed the old split-rail fence, half collapsed, half standing with the stubbornness of things built by hand, and the land finally opened into view. The homestead. A weather-beaten farmhouse crouched at the center of the property, shutters crooked from years of storms, roof patched with mismatched shingles. Beside it stood a leaning windmill, its vanes clicking lightly in the breeze like an old clock remembering how to turn. Beyond the yard stretched an orchard of half-wild apple trees, their branches knotted and silvered with lichen. Marcus paused at the gate. The iron latch was cool beneath his glove. No matter how many times he'd looked at this place over the past week, ever since the letter from a lawyer told him he'd inherited it from a woman he'd never met, he still felt the same uneasy pull. Not dread, not hope, something in between. Echo brushed his leg, urging him forward. "All right," Marcus murmured. "Home for now." They stepped inside the yard. The silence was profound, not empty but expectant, as if the land had been holding its breath for years, waiting for footsteps to return. Marcus settled into work without ceremony. It was the only way he knew. He dropped his pack by the porch and headed straight for the shed, Echo following close. The shed door hung crooked on one hinge. The lock was snapped clean through. He crouched, running a hand over the brake. "Wasn't the storm?" he said quietly. Echo sniffed the threshold and whined, ears flattening. "We'll board it up later." Inside the shed was a graveyard of forgotten tools, rusted saws, cracked buckets, piles of ropes eaten through by time. Yet someone had disturbed them recently. A trail of dust led to the back wall where several tool hooks hung empty. Bolt cutters, a pry bar, a flashlight. Marcus frowned. A trespasser breaking into a property that hadn't been occupied in over a decade. For what scrap metal old timber, Echo nudged his boot, directing his attention downward. A small pile of clay and pebbles rested under the missing tools. Strange. No reason for fresh soil to be inside the shed, unless someone had scraped it off their boots. The color was the same reddish-brown clay from the cliffside. Marcus exhaled slowly. Same guy, or working with whoever we heard. Echo stared at him as if agreeing. The afternoon moved forward with the patience of early autumn. Thin sunlight drifted across the fields, breaking occasionally through ragged clouds. Marcus spent hours hauling broken boards from the porch, clearing the gutters, repairing a shutter that had nearly torn free. Echo kept watch, pacing a slow perimeter around the house. The dog paused now and then to sniff the air gaze, drifting toward the tree line with a faint growl, neither hostile nor afraid, just aware. Despite the labor, Marcus felt the familiar quiet settle into his bones, the kind that came only when he was working with his hands. His world shrank to the rhythm of nails and wood fibers, to the scent of sawdust and the steady presence of Echo nearby. For a while it felt almost peaceful. But peace, Marcus knew, was a fragile guest. As he hammered the last board into place, a memory brushed his mind uninvited: the whine of rotor blades, dust burning in the air, a teammate's shout swallowed by an explosion that nearly split the sky. He blinked hard, the edges of the porch sharpening again as the memory retreated. Echo nudged his thigh gently. "Yeah," Marcus whispered. "Still here." He wasn't sure if he meant himself or the dog. Both were true. Near sunset, Marcus checked the pump house by the orchard. The small generator inside had survived better than expected. He leaned down to test the water line and paused. A faint hum vibrated through the metal pipes. Not the generator. It was rhythmic, pulsing in time, with the tide somewhere beneath the earth. Echo cocked his head ears, swiveling. "You hear it too?" Marcus asked. The hum deepened suddenly, like something beneath the soil exhaled. Echo growled, not a warning, but confusion. Marcus straightened slowly. "This land's got bones I don't know about." The dog pressed close to him, tail lowered. Whatever lay beneath the homestead, it wasn't mechanical. They returned to the house as dusk tinted the sky lavender. Marcus lit the lanterns one by one, the warm glow washing across peeling wallpaper and dusty shelves. He sat on the floor beside Echo's bed, checking the dog's paws for cuts from the rocks earlier. Echo endured the inspection with his usual stoic patience, only sneaking in a lick to Marcus's wrist when the cold ointment touched his pads. Marcus huffed a small smile. Drama queen. Echo thumped his tail in mock offense. The soft moment faded when a car engine hummed faintly from the distant road. Marcus's shoulders tightened instinctively. He crossed to the window, lifting a corner of the curtain. A black SUV rolled slowly down the gravel road, headlights off. It passed the property without stopping, but not without slowing. Someone in the passenger seat was looking. Marcus felt Echo press against his legs, silent and focused. The SUV disappeared around the bend, lights still off. Marcus dropped the curtain. Not neighbors. Echo's low rumble confirmed his thought. Someone was assessing the land. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Night settled thickly over Hawkshade Point. The stars hid behind gauzy clouds, and the wind moved in long sighs across the field. Marcus heated canned stew over the stove and ate standing, too restless to sit. Echo curled by the door nose, twitching each time the wind changed. Marcus glanced at him. "If you smell something, tell me." The dog's eyes flicked up, steady and intelligent. Marcus sat on the floor beside him, leaning against the doorframe. He found himself studying the dog's features, the brindled coat, the scar across Echo's muzzle from a collapsed building in Aleppo, the way his ears always angled slightly toward Marcus, even in sleep. Echo wasn't just trained to save people. He lived for it. Marcus swallowed. "You're the brave one between us." Echo nudged his hand with his nose. It was a simple gesture, but it loosened something tight in Marcus's chest. Wind rattled the shutters near midnight. Marcus stirred awake on the couch, Echo already up and staring at the back door. One ear lifted. A single soft chuff left his throat. Not danger, curiosity. Marcus rose slowly, joints stiff. "What is it, boy?" Echo walked to the window overlooking the orchard. Marcus peered out. Something small glowed faintly among the trees, like a lantern moving low to the ground. He blinked once. The light was gone. Echo pressed against the window frame, tail swinging in small, uncertain arcs. That reaction unsettled Marcus even more. Echo didn't spook, not easily, not ever. "Could be wildfire reflection," Marcus whispered. "Distant headlights." Echo didn't agree. He backed away and sat rigid and alert. The orchard remained dark. Marcus rubbed a hand over his jaw. "All right. Tomorrow we investigate." Echo settled at his feet but didn't sleep. Morning came silver and cold. Frost clung to the grass, shimmering like scales across the field. Marcus pulled on his jacket and walked the perimeter with Echo. The dog stopped near the corner of the orchard where the light had appeared. He sniffed the ground intensely, then pawed forward and unearthed something half buried in the soil, a metal tag, rectangular. Scratched with initials RC, Marcus's heartbeat tightened. Someone marked this spot. Echo's tail rose slightly, uncertain but ready. Marcus stood scanning the woods. This wasn't random. Someone's planning something. The wind carried the faint sound of an engine far but approaching. Echo stood taller, waiting. Marcus exhaled slowly, the cold air biting his lungs. "Let's see who's coming." The engine's hum grew clearer, threading through the trees like a warning. Marcus stepped onto the porch, Echo flanking him with practiced precision. A white county truck rolled down the gravel road, its amber hazard lights blinking in slow, patient rhythm. Not hostile, not hiding, official. The truck eased to a stop by the fence, and a man climbed out mid-50 seconds, compact build, wearing a reflective vest and carrying a survey tablet under one arm. He raised a hand in greeting with a nervous half-smile. "Morning," he called. "I'm looking for Marcus Hale." Marcus didn't move from the porch. "You found him." The man nodded quickly, adjusting his glasses. "Name's Evan Price. County land assessment. I was told the old Reedman property had a new occupant." Echo stood at Marcus's leg gaze, fixed tail still. Evan swallowed. "Friendly dog depends," Marcus said evenly. "What brings you out here?" Evan stepped forward, tablet tucked against his ribs. "Routine. Lot ownership changes require updated boundary scans. Should only take 20 minutes. He paused. "Mind if I walk the south corner?" Marcus studied him closely. Nothing aggressive in his stance. No scent of oil or metal that usually made Echo bristle. Echo sniffed the air once, twice, then relaxed a fraction. "All right," Marcus said finally. "Southfield's open." Evan exhaled in visible relief and headed toward the orchard boots, crunching frost. Marcus watched him go. Echo watched harder. When the man disappeared behind the apple trees, Marcus crouched beside the dog. "What do you think?" Echo flicked an ear. "Not danger, not trust, something in between." Minutes later, Evan returned slightly pale, tapping rapidly on his tablet. "Didn't expect to see old markers out there," he said carefully. "Some of these lines haven't been updated in decades." Marcus stiffened. "Meaning," Evan met his eyes, "meaning this property might be bigger than you were told." A gust of wind swept across the porch, rattling the boards and ringing the battered wind chime overhead. Echo stepped forward, nose pointed at the orchard. A low growl rumbled in his chest, unmistakably a warning this time. Marcus's pulse tightened. Something or someone was out there beyond the frost-lit apple trees, watching, waiting. And Echo had just drawn the line between curiosity and threat. The wind sharpened by late afternoon. Thin clouds drifted low over the treetops, turning the light a muted silver. Evan Price had driven off hours earlier, but Marcus hadn't stopped thinking about the unease behind the man's polite smile or the way Echo had stiffened when Evan passed the south corner. Something was shifting in the land. Not physically, intentionally. Marcus tightened the final bolt on the repaired porch step and wiped his hands on his jeans. Echo patrolled the yard nose close to the ground, tracing invisible patterns Marcus couldn't see. "Find something," Marcus called. Echo looked up briefly, then continued pacing the perimeter with growing intensity. Not normal, not routine. The dog paused near the orchard's edge and gave a single sharp bark. "Show me," Marcus said. Echo led him between the apple trees. In the soft earth beneath one of the trunks was a fresh boot print, deep, narrow, not Marcus's, not Evan's. Soil still clung to the edges. Someone had stood here not long ago, watching, listening. Marcus crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the dirt. Cold, damp, recent. Echo circled the tree once, hackles lifting, breath quickening. "All right," Marcus murmured. "Let's head back before dark." But Echo didn't move. He stared into the darker stretch of woods with absolute focus. Marcus followed the dog's gaze. At first he saw only thick pines and long, twisted shadows. Then movement. Quick. Low. A figure slipping behind a trunk. Marcus straightened slowly. "We're not doing this in the dark," he said under his breath. Echo let out a low rumble. Inside. Now. They returned to the house, Echo backing through the doorway as if expecting an attack from behind. Marcus bolted the door, lit the lantern, and set his rifle unloaded but comforting on the table. The silence inside the house felt different tonight. Tighter. Listening. Night fell in a slow, suffocating way, swallowing the last streaks of daylight. Marcus poured water into a tin cup and leaned against the counter, studying the shadows stretching across the floor. Echo lay facing the back door, body taut even in stillness. "You smell him, don't you?" Marcus whispered. Echo's ear twitched. "Yes." Marcus glanced at the old battery clock on the wall. Almost 9. Too late for hikers. Too early for anyone to be checking landlines. He set the cup down. "Come on," he said softly. Echo rose immediately. Marcus killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. His eyes adjusted slowly. A sound broke the stillness. Barely audible. A click. Wood bending. A hinge shifting quietly, deliberately by someone who didn't want to be heard. Echo's entire body went rigid. The back door latch. Someone was testing it. Marcus gestured Echo behind him and moved silently toward the kitchen. He reached the doorway and froze. The latch jiggled again. Then a soft scrape. Metal on wood. A tool slipping between the frame and the lock. Marcus lowered his voice to a whisper. "On me, Echo." The dog inched forward, breath, steady muscles coiled like wire. A final decisive snap sounded, and the back door creaked open an inch. Marcus exhaled once slow and controlled. Everything after that happened fast. The door burst inward. Two figures surged through silhouettes backlit by moonlight. Echo launched forward with a deep explosive bark. The first intruder swung a flashlight like a club. Marcus deflected it with his forearm, grabbed the man's jacket, and drove him into the counter hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. The second intruder rushed Echo with a steel hook. Echo dodged, teeth bared in a controlled snarl, never biting, only pushing, forcing the man backward until he stumbled over a chair. "Don't fight." The intruder hissed, breath ragged. "We just need." Marcus slammed the first man's wrist against the table. "Need what?" the man gasped. "Don't know his name, he just wants." A bright flash lit the window headlights sweeping across the orchard. A car. Waiting. Running. Driver inside. The first intruder twisted free and sprinted toward the hallway. Echo lunged to intercept, but the second guy grabbed a jar from the counter and flung it at the dog. Glass shattered, scattering beans across the floor. Echo skidded, regained balance, and bolted after him. Marcus grabbed the fallen flashlight and chased them out the front door. But the intruders were already in motion, sprinting across the yard like frightened animals. The SUV's engine roared. Doors slammed. Tires spun in gravel. "Echo back," Marcus shouted. Echo braked hard, paws kicking up dirt, stopping just shy of the racing vehicle. The SUV fishtailed, then accelerated down the road, taillights shrinking until they vanished into the trees. Marcus stood breathing hard, hands shaking with adrenaline. Echo returned to his side, pressing a warm, steady weight against his leg. "Good boy," Marcus murmured. "You kept us standing." Echo panted softly, eyes still fixed in the direction the SUV had gone. Marcus turned back toward the house. Something glinted on the ground near the porch steps. A fallen object, a folded document half soaked from the dirt. He crouched, snapped open his pocket knife, and lifted it carefully. The paper was crisp, too new, not like anything from the house. On top was a Seal County registrar. But the signature was wrong. And the name typed in bold lettering, transfer of ownership parcel, 18A Hawkshade Point. Transferring the entire property to someone Marcus had never heard of. RC Holdings. Echo leaned close, nose brushing Marcus's glove. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's forging deeds. He closed the paper with trembling fingers, and that's when the deeper realization hit him. You forge ownership only when you can't obtain the land legally. You trespass only when you're searching for something hidden, and you break into an occupied house only when you need it fast. Marcus rose slowly. "They weren't here to steal," he said. Echo stared up at him, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "They were here," Marcus continued, "for whatever this land is hiding." Echo let out a single unblinking bark. Confirmation. The homestead was no longer a quiet refuge. It was the center of a hunt, and Marcus had just stepped into the middle of it. End of Section 3. If you want to continue with Section 4, rising action and flashbacks is approximately equal to 4200 words. Just say okay next. The following morning rose flat and gray, the kind of dawn that looked like the world was trying to hide behind its own light. Marcus didn't sleep. Echo dozed lightly beside the couch, waking every time the wind brushed a branch against the siding. By 6, both were on their feet, the house too tight with unanswered questions to stay inside. Marcus lifted the forged document again, now dried on the counter. The signature line at the bottom wavered slightly as though rushed. The parcel number was correct. The coordinates lined up with Hawkshade Point. But the listed owner, RC Holdings, wasn't a company he recognized. Echo nudged the paper, nose wrinkling. He didn't like its smell. Marcus didn't either. "Let's get some answers," he murmured. Echo's tail lifted, cautious but ready. They started with the perimeter. Frost cracked under Marcus's boots as he walked the fence line. The air smelled of thawing earth and something deeper, newly disturbed soil overturned recently, perhaps by the intruders. Echo weaved ahead, stopping every few yards to sniff, circle, and move on. At the orchard's edge, Echo froze. His body straightened, tail stiff, ears locked. Marcus approached slowly. "What do you see?" Echo pawed at a patch of ground near the roots of a dying apple tree. Fresh indentations marred the earth, 3 triangular impressions spaced evenly in a row. Tool marks. A spike, maybe, or survey stakes. But the spacing was wrong. Marcus knelt, brushing soil aside. "No stake leaves this shape," he whispered. The indentations matched something else. He had seen them overseas, metal tripod feet used to stabilize mapping equipment. High-end gear, not something a random trespasser carried. Echo whined low in his throat. Someone's mapping the land, Marcus said. Not casually, professionally. But why Echo lifted his head toward the south field and sniffed deeply, then sneezed hard. The same whiff of machine oil. Marcus followed the scent. A shallow trail of flattened grass led through the orchard and into the field. At the end of the trail, half concealed beneath weeds, lay a discarded piece of fabric. Marcus picked it up carefully, a sleeve torn from a jacket. Thick black fire-resistant fiber, something shimmering along the seam, silver residue. He held it to the light. Industrial lubricant, he murmured. Why would a land scout wear something coated in that? Echo took. A sniff recoiled, then barked sharply. Marcus pocketed the sleeve. Whatever this is, it's bigger than a boundary dispute. By late morning, Marcus drove into town, a sparse cluster of buildings hugging the coastline. Echo rode in the passenger seat, head out the window, eyes scanning every driveway. The county building sat on the hill above the harbor, a square concrete structure so old the paint had peeled into curling strips. Inside, the air smelled of paper dust and a faint metallic tang like filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. A receptionist directed him to the land records office, where rows of shelves sagged under thick binders. A woman in her 42s wearing a sweater with faded reindeer sat behind the desk. "Morning," she said without looking up. Parcel number. Marcus slid the forged document across. "I need to know if this is legitimate." She scanned it, frowned, and tapped her keyboard slowly. Transfer request for parcel 18. She squinted. "We didn't process this. It was found on my property." She finally looked up at him, and then at Echo, who sat, planted by Marcus's leg like a statue with glowing eyes. "You live on Hawkshade Point. For now, that place hasn't had a full owner in 10 years. The last will was contested but never resolved." She typed more. "No one filed this. And this signature," she held the paper up to the light. "Not anyone in this office. So it's forged." "More than forged," she murmured. "It's premature. Premature." She bit her lip. "Mr. Hale. Someone's been asking about that land for months. Calling, stopping by, looking for old plot maps. They didn't give a name. Just said they were representing interests." She lowered her voice. "Men in suits. Not the friendly kind." Echo growled softly. The woman leaned closer. "If I were you, I'd get legal help. I'll do that." As he turned to leave, she added quietly, "Be careful on that land. It's got a history of drawing the wrong people." The sheriff's office was next. Sheriff Layla Quinn, a trim woman in her late 32s with stern posture and eyes that missed nothing, leaned back in her chair as Marcus explained the break-in and forged deed. Echo sat beside him, watching her with polite intensity. "You fight off the intruders?" she asked. "They left fast. That doesn't surprise me." She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Marcus, you've stepped into something people in this county have whispered about for years, which is Hawkshade's water rights." She tapped her pen on the desk. "The land isn't just valuable, it's potentially seismic for the county. There are rumors about an underground freshwater vein. Untapped. Private." Marcus stiffened. "I heard something humming under the pump house." Sheriff Quinn nodded. "Others have heard it too. No one's found the source." She stood and crossed to the file cabinet. "But one man's been trying." Who? She pulled a laminated photo from a folder. A man with pale eyes, slicked back hair, and a thin, calculated smile. Rowan Creed. The name hit Marcus like cold water. RC Holdings. "Creed is dangerous," she said. "We've tried to stop his projects before. He uses money, lawyers, intimidation. And if that doesn't work," she lowered her voice, "he uses men who don't mind getting their shoes dirty." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He wants the land," he said. "He wants whatever is under it," she corrected. Echo growled again, low and vibrating. Sheriff Quinn glanced down at him. "Smart dog. The best," Marcus murmured. She sighed. "I'll patrol near your property tonight. But Marcus, don't underestimate Creed. He doesn't care who gets hurt." Marcus nodded once. "I'll handle my side." Echo pressed against Marcus's leg as if offering silent backing. They returned home by midday, but home no longer felt untouched. At the porch, Echo stiffened immediately. He walked in tight circles, nose brushing the boards, ears pricked forward. Marcus crouched. "What is it?" Echo stopped at the bottom step, staring at a small object wedged between two planks. Marcus reached out carefully. A metal cap, hex-shaped, threaded, silver. It smelled strongly of the same industrial lubricant from the torn sleeve, and etched faintly along the top tiny initials, RC. A chill slid down Marcus's spine. Creed's people hadn't broken in randomly. They had been here today, plotting, measuring, preparing. Echo nudged the porch railing, suddenly whining. Marcus followed him and saw the faintest scrape along the wood, like something heavy had rested there briefly. A case, maybe. Equipment, survey gear. They were right on the house, Marcus whispered. Echo barked once, sharp and emphatic. Someone was escalating, and they had done it in broad daylight. Marcus set about reinforcing every door and window. Echo stayed glued to him, following from room to room as boards were screwed into frames and old locks replaced with new ones he'd bought in town. With every strike of the hammer, Marcus felt a piece of himself sharpening the old instincts, stirring but not the violent ones, the protective ones. He had walked away from responsibilities before, but Echo had never left him. And now this land mysterious, wounded waiting felt like something worth defending. As Marcus worked, Echo froze suddenly in the living room, ears snapping toward the pump house. Marcus held still. Nothing moved, but Echo's eyes burned steady alert. "You want to check it out," Marcus whispered. Echo trotted to the door. Marcus grabbed his jacket, slid the new wrench into his belt, and followed the dog into the raw, cold air. The orchard loomed, quiet branches swaying like slow dancers. They reached the pump house. Echo hesitated at the threshold. Marcus tested the latch. Unlocked. He hadn't left it that way. A cold bead slid down his spine. "Stay behind me," Marcus murmured. He opened the door. Inside, the air was darker, colder, and humming. But not the same sound as before. This hum was deeper, mechanical, angry. Echo's teeth flashed. Something was very wrong. Marcus stepped inside. Echo followed. And the floor vibrated. The vibration under Marcus's boots was faint at first, more like a distant echo than a real tremor, but it carried a pulse, an irregular throb that didn't belong to the old pump machinery. Echo paced in a slow arc around the narrow room nose, sweeping the floorboards. His nails clicked sharply on one plank in particular. Marcus crouched, laying a palm on the board. Warm. Not from the Sunday. Not from the house. From something below it. He pressed harder. The hum deepened as if responding to his touch. Echo's ears flattened. He stepped back uneasy. "All right," Marcus murmured. "We're missing something." He searched the shelves, jars of bolts, cracked gauges, old fuel cans, but nothing looked disturbed. No broken lock, no forced entry. Whoever had been here had left no trace except the vibration and Echo's reaction. Then Marcus noticed the lantern. It sat on the far crate lit. Barely. A shaky flame. Still burning. He hadn't lit it. Someone had been here recently, close enough to see the orchard, close enough to hear him approach. Echo growled softly. Marcus checked behind the tool bench. No footprints, no foreign scent, except a faint chemical tang. Industrial lubricant, the same he'd found on the torn sleeve. He straightened. "They're checking the pressure, mapping the underwater line itself." Echo let out a frustrated bark sharp enough to echo off the metal walls. "Yeah," Marcus murmured. "They're getting bold." He lifted the loose board with the pry bar. Beneath it, darkness opened into a narrow crawl space. Musty, damp, earthen. He lowered his flashlight. A thin pipe, old iron coated in rust, ran through the space. But next to it, buried partially in the soil, something glimmered. He reached down and pulled it free. A metal cylinder, palm-length, capped at both ends. Smooth, heavy, etched with faint markings that time hadn't erased. He brushed the dirt away. Coordinates. Shallow depth. A line connecting to a larger network, unfamiliar contours, like branching veins. An underground map. Echo whined, recognizing its significance even without understanding. Marcus felt his pulse settle into a cold resolve. This is why they're here. He pocketed the cylinder and lowered the board, gently restoring the room to its original state. When he stepped outside, the orchard looked different. Not visually, nothing had changed. But he sensed presence, thought, calculation. Echo pressed against Marcus's knee, tail rigid. Then the dog's ears jerked toward the edge of the woods. Footsteps, light but hurried. Someone running. Marcus didn't hesitate. Echo track. The dog launched forward into the trees. Marcus followed, crashing through branches, boots pounding the forest floor. The scent trail was fresh. Echo wove around Fir Trunk's nose, lowered breath sharp and focused. The forest swallowed their path quickly, thick underbrush, rising fog, the scent of cold sap, but Echo never faltered. A branch snapped ahead. Marcus slowed, shouldering behind a pine. Echo crouched low beside him, tail straight like a pointer. 30 yards away, a figure sprinted between trees, a man slender wearing a dark jacket. A duffel swung from his shoulder. He wasn't moving randomly. He knew this forest. He cut through natural clearings, avoiding briars as if he'd walked the route 100 times. Marcus whispered, "He's practiced." Echo growled. The man reached a ridge and slipped down the far side, disappearing. Marcus stopped at the top of the ridge. Below lay a narrow dirt road leading toward a rusted metal trailer set back in the brush. Smoke drifted from a chimney. Generator hum. Footprints everywhere. A base camp. Echo looked up at Marcus, waiting. "We're not going down yet," Marcus murmured. "We need a plan." He memorized the layout, the trailer door, the distant movement inside. Then he retreated silently with Echo until the road vanished behind the trees. By nightfall, a low fog rolled across Hawkshade Point. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with maps spread out before him, county topography, the old homestead diagram he'd found in the attic, and a new sheet he'd sketched of the metal cylinder's markings. Echo lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, but sleep refused to claim him. Every few minutes he lifted his head, listening, not paranoid, just precise. Marcus traced the lines on the cylinder map again. They converged beneath Hawkshade Point, running toward a shaded area marked decades ago as unstable bedrock. Not dangerous, protected. A freshwater chamber. If Creed controlled that chamber, he'd control the region's water rights, millions of dollars at stake. And if the county didn't know the chamber existed, forging ownership would be the fastest route. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The metal of the cylinder felt cold through his jacket. He reached down and stroked Echo's head. "You found the first clue. Good work." Echo thumped his tail, once tired but trusting. A soft tapping sounded at the window. Marcus froze. Echo's head snapped up, ears sharp. The tapping came again, 2 taps, then a pause, then 2 more. Not random. A signal. Marcus approached slowly. "Stay behind me." Echo moved in perfect sync. Marcus tilted the curtain just enough to see outside. Fog blanketed the yard. The orchard was only a faint silhouette. But on the porch, a piece of paper, pinned under a stone. Fresh, white, waiting. Marcus opened the door, cautiously, wrench in hand. The fog wrapped around him like cold breath. Echo remained in the doorway, eyes blazing yellow in the lantern light. Marcus lifted the paper. 3 words typed, "We need to talk." Echo growled immediately. Marcus flipped the page. A set of coordinates. Not far, maybe a mile down the coast near the tide pools. And beneath them, a time, just before dawn. Echo's hackles rose. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "Feels like a trap." But something else tugged at him. Whoever left the note knew his land, his schedule, his habits. And they weren't trying to break in this time. They wanted a conversation. Marcus folded the note slowly. "We're going." Echo barked once, sharp, disapproving. Marcus knelt beside him. "We're not walking into this blind, just close enough to see who shows up. Then we reassess." Echo huffed, but accepted the terms. The hours bled toward dawn. Fog thickened. The house exhaled cold through every seam. At 0310, Marcus slung his jacket on, clipped a reflective band onto Echo's collar, and extinguished the lanterns. Darkness pressed tight around them. "Quiet," he whispered. Echo answered with silence. They moved through the orchard in shadow, crossing the frost-glittered grass and slipping into the trees. The forest swallowed them without a sound. The coordinates led them to a rocky overlook above the tide pools. Waves lapped gently below, more whisper than roar. Echo froze. Marcus followed his gaze. A figure stood by the water's edge. Tall, still. Hands visible. No weapon. Moonlight glimmered off his coat. Marcus recognized him instantly. Evan Price, the county surveyor. But something was wrong. His posture wasn't professional. It was fearful. Marcus stepped forward, Echo beside him. "Price, you left the note," Evan startled, nearly slipping on the rocks. "Hale, thank God. What are you doing out here? I had to warn you." Evan looked around, panic sharpening his voice. "They know you found the cylinder. They know you were in the pump house. They've been watching you since you arrived." Echo growled, a strange mixture of recognition and distrust. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "How do you know that?" Evan ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Because I used to work for Creed." Echo snarled. Evan backed up against the rocks, palms raised. "I left him, I swear. The man's not just after water rights. He's after something else under that land. Something old." Something. A twig snapped behind them. Echo spun, barking with explosive force. Marcus turned fast. Another figure stepped out of the fog. Not Evan, not friendly, and holding something metallic in his hand. Moonlight caught the shape in the stranger's hand, sleek metal compact, unmistakably built to fire a charged stun burst. Not lethal, but enough to incapacitate a man, enough to take him alive. Echo's bark ricocheted off the cliffs, sharp enough to startle gulls from the rocks below. "Easy," Evan gasped, stepping between the stranger and Marcus. "He's not supposed to be here yet." The stranger shoved Evan aside with a brutal shoulder check. Marcus didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing Echo's collar and pulling him behind the large boulder as the stun device crackled, sending a bright arc of blue-white electricity snapping through the fog. The blast hit the rock with a violent hiss, scorching stone. "Stay close," Marcus whispered. Echo pressed against him, muscles trembling with contained fury. Boots scraped across gravel. The stranger closed in. Marcus's mind snapped into its old, cold clarity calculation, first movement second. Fog thick. Ground uneven. Single assailant. Armed. Confident. Sloppy footwork heavier on the right. Marcus waited. Now. He grabbed a fist-sized stone and hurled it hard into the opposite direction. It clattered loudly against the tide pool basin. The stranger spun toward the noise, raising the device. Marcus surged up from behind the boulder, driving his shoulder into the man's back. The stun device flew from his grip and skidded across the rocks. Echo lunged immediately, placing himself between the device and the assailant. The stranger tried to recover, swinging a heavy elbow. Marcus blocked it, grabbed his coat collar, and drove him onto the wet sand with a bone-jarring thud. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded. The man spit sand and snapped back. "You already know. Creed." Marcus tightened his grip. "What's he looking for?" The stranger coughed a laugh. "Doesn't matter. He'll tear that land open with or without you." Echo snarled, stepping closer. The man flinched. "Call off the mutt." Marcus yanked him upright. "Not until you tell me why he's here." The man's jaw clenched. Fear flickered across his eyes for the first time. "He wants the chamber," the man said. "The one under your house." Evan, still bruised and shaken, stumbled to his feet. "I told you," he whispered. "There's more down there than fresh water." Marcus shot him a narrow look. "What does he think he'll find?" Evan swallowed hard. "Pressure signatures. Thermal deviations. The readings are unnatural." Fog swirled low across the rocks as the first light hints of pre-dawn stained the sky. Unnatural. Below the homestead, Echo's ears flicked movement behind them. Marcus reacted instantly. Down, a second figure burst from the fog, sprinting full tilt down the slope. Echo intercepted him before the man could reach Marcus' body, slamming the intruder sideways into the stones. They tumbled, Echo's deep growl vibrating through the air. Evan staggered backward, horrified. They sent 2-2 at least. Marcus grabbed the first attacker, dragging him toward the cliff wall. The man struggled, throwing wild punches, but Marcus's grip didn't budge. Not this time. Not on this land. A shriek of metal echoed as the second intruder rolled toward the tide pool. Echo pinning him with controlled ferocity, teeth bared but not biting weight centered over the man's chest, making it impossible for him to stand. The man froze. Marcus hauled the first intruder to his feet again. "What's the plan? Sabotage? Force me off the land? What is Creed after?" The man's breath came fast. "He wants the chamber intact." "Why, he thinks it's not natural. He thinks it's man-made." The words hung in the fog like coiled wire. Evan took a step back. "That's impossible." Marcus stared at the man's trembling face. "Explain." "I don't know details," the intruder rasped. "Creed hired specialists years ago. They found metallic echoes at the core. Straight lines, not mineral. A man-made structure beneath the property." Marcus felt Echo's gaze shift to him, quiet, steady, waiting. The intruder wheezed. "He thinks the original homesteaders buried something. Something old. Something valuable enough to reshape the county." Lightning flickered far offshore, silent heat lightning that blinked against the dimming fog. Marcus tightened his hold. "And where does the forged deed fit?" "It doesn't. It's theater." The man coughed. "He's already paid off a surveyor. The rezoning vote is just his insurance." Evan flinched. "Paid off," he whispered. Marcus saw guilt flicker across Evan's face, brief but telling. "You weren't just hired, were you?" Marcus said quietly. Evan looked at the ground. "I needed the money. When my wife left, bills piled up. Creed promised a bonus if I identified pressure anomalies." "You didn't tell him everything," Marcus said, reading his shame. Evan shook his head violently. "I couldn't. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt. Whatever's under your house, nobody should dig it up." Marcus stared at him. The truth wasn't clean, but it was real. Behind them, Echo snarled again, warning, not attack. The second intruder was shifting, trying to inch toward the stun device on the sand. Marcus strode over, scooped the device with his boot, and kicked it far into the tide pool with a splash. The man swore. "You're done here," Marcus said coldly. Then a voice drifted from the fog above. Slow, measured, unmistakably confident. "Mr. Hale." Every muscle in Marcus's body went taut. Echo bristled and pivoted, body-coiled eyes burning. A silhouette appeared atop the slope, outlined by the faint pink of the coming dawn. Rowan Creed. Tall, immaculate coat, hands in his pockets as if arriving early to a business meeting. His voice reached them like a knife-cutting fog. "I've been hoping we'd meet without the distractions." Marcus didn't move. "Call off your men." Creed gestured casually. Both intruders froze instantly. Echo growled, teeth flashing. Creed's eyes gleamed. Remarkable animal. But he's in the way now. Marcus stepped between them. "What do you want, Creed?" "What's mine?" Creed said. "What was promised to me before you ever stepped foot on this land? It doesn't belong to you." Creed smiled, gentle, almost pitying. "Everything belongs to those who can shape its future." He took one slow step down the slope. Fog curled at his feet like smoke. "You're a soldier, Mr. Hale. A man who understands purpose. I respect that." He cocked his head. "But you're standing on something extraordinary. Something that needs to be uncovered, not guarded by sentiment." Marcus's jaw tightened. "This land's not for sale. Everything is for sale," Creed replied softly. "You just haven't named your price." Echo erupted in a harsh bark, stepping closer. Creed's eyes flicked toward the dog with disdain. "That animal has excellent instincts." He paused. "He can sense the chamber too, can't he? The vibration, the heat, the depth." Marcus's pulse hammered. Creed smiled wider. "Good. Then he'll lead me straight to it." Marcus's voice dropped. "You'll never touch him." Creed took another step. "On the contrary, I already have a plan for him." Marcus moved first. Echo followed a heartbeat later. But Creed simply lifted a small object and pressed its trigger. A piercing whistle exploded through the air, ultrasonic, sharp enough to slice through bone. Echo crumpled, whining in agony. Marcus's heart ripped open. Echo Creed's smile widened. "I warned you, Mr. Hale." The whistle felt like a blade slicing through the air. Echo dropped sideways onto the rocks, paws clawing helplessly, ears pinned tight, a strangled whine caught in his throat. His muscles spasmed, then locked. Marcus's vision tunneled. He lunged toward the dog, but Creed's men moved faster. One grabbed Marcus's arm, the other his shoulder, yanking him back with practiced force. "Don't," the first hissed. "Next level will knock him out for hours." The whistle died abruptly. The sound vanished, leaving only the echo of waves and Echo's ragged breathing. The dog lay shaking, eyes wide but unfocused. Marcus fought against the grip on his arms, but the men held him like anchors. "Let him go," Marcus snarled. "Now." Creed descended the slope with calm, measured steps. "I don't enjoy this," he said mildly. "But you left me few options." He crouched beside Echo, studying him like a mechanic assessing an engine. "Smart animal," Creed murmured. "Deep sensitivity to vibration, scent, and pressure. He's exactly what I need." Marcus's voice turned lethal. "You touch him again," Creed raised a hand. "Relax. He's not harmed. Just overwhelmed." His gaze flicked up. "Consider this a demonstration of what happens when you stand in the way of progress." Evan stood frozen beside the tide pool, face pale, mouth working soundlessly. Creed glanced at him. "And you, Mr. Price, will be dealt with separately. Traitors are bad for business." Evan swallowed. I didn't." Creed ignored him and turned back to Marcus. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Hale. Not truly. The world changes because people like me take risks others avoid. This chamber beneath your land, it's a resource, not a shrine." "It's not yours," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "It will be." Creed straightened, brushing sand off his coat. "The rezoning vote is in 11 days. Once the county grants me the pipeline permit, this entire coastline shifts jobs, revenue, infrastructure." "At what cost?" Marcus snapped. Creed's eyes chilled. "Cost is a word used by people afraid to do the necessary work." He nodded toward Echo. "Bring the dog." The two men tightened their grips on Marcus instinctively, as if expecting him to explode. Instead, he went still, completely still. "Try," he said softly. Creed's gaze lingered on him, assessing, calculating. Then he smiled. "No," he decided. "Not tonight. You're more useful as you are." He turned away. "Let's go." The men released Marcus, stepping back carefully. Creed's silhouette melted into the fog with them, the three shapes fading like ghosts. Evan let out a shuddering breath. I I thought he was just bluffing. I didn't know about the whistle. I swear Marcus was already on his knees beside Echo. The dog trembled, breathing shallow and fast. His legs twitched as if running in place, paws scraping weakly at the rocks. "Hey," Marcus murmured. "Hey, I've got you." He slid one arm under Echo's chest, the other beneath his hindquarters, and lifted carefully. Echo whimpered but didn't resist muscle memory trusting those hands. Marcus pressed his forehead briefly against Echo's. "I'm so sorry, buddy." Echo's eyes met his, dazed but present. Marcus carried him up the slope every step, a battle against the urge to turn and chase Creed into the fog. He didn't. Not yet. He needed Echo breathing first. Back at the house, Marcus laid Echo on a blanket near the stove, wrapped him in another, and checked his pupils and pulse with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd treated field injuries in worse places. Echo's breathing had steadied. His muscles twitched occasionally like a sleeper caught in a bad dream. Marcus warmed his hands near the kettle and placed them against Echo's ears and chest, sharing heat. "I've got you," he repeated softly. "We're okay. You're okay." Echo blinked slowly, then exhaled a thin, rustling sigh. His tail tapped once, the smallest sign. Marcus swallowed against the tightness in his throat. Evan stood by the doorway, shoulders hunched, hands deep in his pockets like a man who shouldn't be there and knew it. "I didn't know he'd bring the whistle," Evan said quietly. "He used one on a protest once. A crowd of dogs. All at once. They never walked right after." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Why'd you work for him, I told you," Evan said. "Debt. Desperation." His eyes flicked to Echo. "Cowardice." Marcus didn't answer. Evan stepped closer, holding something out. A folder, yellowed edges worn. "He doesn't know I copied these," Evan said. "Old surveys. Before Creed bought out the paper mill. Look at the bottom margins." Marcus hesitated, then took the folder and flipped it open. The first page showed a cross-section of Hawkshade Point soil layers, bedrock, and a shaded pocket beneath the property. Notes in pencil labeled it Anomaly A. At the bottom margin, in smaller handwriting, chamber seems too geometric. Straight lines and sonar. Possible man-made cavity. Further study halted by budget. Marcus turned the page. More diagrams. More marginalia. Echo shifted weakly, a soft huff leaving his chest. Marcus knelt again, resting a hand along the dog's neck. "You're part of this, whether we like it or not, huh?" Echo's eyes softened. Evan spoke quietly. "There's a journal, too. The original homesteader's notes. Not in the records office. Creed's been trying to find it for years." "Where is it?" Marcus asked. Evan swallowed. "If the rumors are true, buried where the chamber hum is strongest. Under the pump house." Marcus straightened. "Then that's where we go." Evan stared at him. "Now after what he just did to your dog, that's exactly why." Marcus's voice was flint. He crossed the line. Echo let out a low rumble, not anger, not fear, but agreement. Marcus reached for his jacket. Evan shook his head. "You don't even know what's down there." "Neither does he," Marcus said. "That's our advantage." They waited until night solidified fully, until the fog thinned and the stars pricked through like distant lanterns. Echo insisted on walking, though he limped slightly, his movements cautious but determined. "If you push it, we go back," Marcus warned. Echo blinked at him, unconvinced. The pump house loomed ahead, its roof like a shadow against the sky. The hum beneath it had deepened, since earlier a low, constant vibration that Marcus now felt through his soles. Evan stood at the threshold, flashlight, shaking slightly in his hand. "This is insane." Marcus lifted the loose floorboard. Cold air breathed up from the darkness. Echo lowered his nose to the opening and inhaled. His body tensed, not in fear, but in recognition. He stepped forward, paws on the edge. "No," Marcus said quietly. "I go first." He lowered himself into the crawl space boots, landing on damp earth. The hum enveloped him immediately, a throbbing, almost musical resonance that vibrated in his chest and teeth. Echo dropped lightly beside him, bracing as his paws hit the soil. Evan followed reluctantly. The narrow tunnel extended toward the cliff, carved through compacted earth and stone. It wasn't natural. The walls were too smooth, the curve too deliberate, as if someone had shaped it years ago with intention and patience. They moved slowly, hunched. Echo led nose, skimming the ground every step careful. The hum grew louder. Marcus's memory flared without warning. Rotor blades overhead, dust burning in his lungs, Echo barking, as the building shuddered, the weight of debris pinning his teammates' legs. He clenched his jaw, forcing the memory down. Not now. Echo glanced back, reading him with uncanny clarity. He brushed his flank against Marcus's leg in passing. "I'm here." The tunnel widened, suddenly opening into a circular chamber. Their flashlights caught on stone, and metal old beams reinforcing the ceiling-carved marks along the walls, and at the center, an underground pool. Perfectly round, glass still, glowing faintly from within. The hum emanated from it a deep, almost living vibration. Evan whispered, "Oh my God." The pool's edge was lined with narrow tiles, faded, cracked, but clearly laid by human hands. Symbols were etched along them, names, dates, phrases, in a mix of languages. Marcus stepped closer. The water shimmered with a pale internal light, phosphorescent algae, perhaps, or mineral reaction. Whatever the source, it painted the chamber in soft blues and greens. Echo lowered his head and sniffed the air above the water. He whined softly, then sat eyes fixed on the pool. Marcus scanned the walls. There, a niche cut into the stone, half hidden by moss. He reached inside and pulled out a small, metal-bound book. The homesteader's journal. The leather was cracked, but the clasp still held. He opened it carefully. Water rights, soil tests, weather logs. And then, on a brittle page near the back, "This chamber must remain unclaimed, or it will belong to the first man ruthless enough to take it. So I leave it not to a blood heir, but to a keeper of mercy. Whoever hears the hum and chooses to protect, not profit." Beneath it, a symbol, a circle of water, with a small etched paw print beside it. Echo nosed the page, huffing gently. Marcus stared at the crude paw print. Keeper of mercy. The words hit deeper than he expected. Evan's voice shook. If Creed gets this, he proves the chamber exists. He argues mismanaged resource. He takes everything. Marcus closed the journal. Then he doesn't get it. He slid the journal into his jacket. Echo stood, ears shifting. Far above them, faint but distinct, a new sound. Boots. On wood. On their porch. Marcus's stomach dropped. "He's here," Evan whispered. Echo's growl built from somewhere deeper than anger, deeper than fear. Marcus looked toward the tunnel entrance, the hum of the chamber, now a heartbeat under his feet. He wasn't just protecting land anymore, not just a secret. He was choosing what kind of man he'd be after the war inside his own head. "Let's go," he said. Echo moved first, eyes blazing, ready to defend the only home they'd had in years. The tunnel felt narrower on the way back. Marcus moved fast, one hand brushing the wall to keep balance, the other resting briefly on Echo's flank whenever the dog slowed to navigate a bend. The hum of the chamber faded behind them, replaced by a different vibration, dull, uneven overhead. Footsteps. More than one set. Inside the house. Evan stumbled in the dark. "He shouldn't know we're down here." "We didn't tell anyone. Creed doesn't wait for permission," Marcus said. "He makes his own." Echo's ears angled back, tracking the sounds above. A quiet whine escaped him, not from fear but from urgency. He pushed ahead, leading them faster through the tunnel. They reached the crawlspace entrance. Marcus killed his flashlight and listened. Boards creaked. A low murmur of voices. Something metallic being dragged across the floor. Echo's gaze burned. Marcus climbed up first, easing the floorboard aside by an inch. A thin shaft of lamplight cut the dark. He saw boots. 4 pairs. Heavy. Impatient. A man's voice smooth, almost bored. "Creed, set it by the wall," Creed said. Gently. "We're not trying to wake the neighbors." A dull thump answered him. Metal hitting wood. Marcus recognized the sound. Compressor tank. High pressure. Too large for casual use. His chest tightened. "Evan," he whispered. "How much pressure would it take to fracture the chamber ceiling?" Evan's voice trembled. Not much if it's already under tension. A targeted blast could make it look like a natural collapse." Marcus swallowed. If Creed couldn't own the chamber, he'd destroy it. Erase the evidence. Claim there was nothing special under Hawkshade Point after all. A slow, ticking sound filtered through the floorboards. Timer. Echo snarled under his breath. Marcus lowered the board quietly, heart hammering. "He's going to blow it," he murmured. "Collapse the pool, wipe the line." Then he files the rezoning request with no unique resources on record. "And the house," Evan whispered. Marcus's jaw flexed. "Collateral." He took a breath, steadying himself. "We don't have time for perfect plans," he said. "We separate Creed from the detonator first, then the tank." Evan swallowed. "And if we can't," Echo responded before Marcus could. He barked once, low, decisive, then nudged the board with his nose. "Let me up." Marcus rested a hand on the dog's back. "You stay behind me," he whispered. "No heroics." Echo stared back like he disagreed completely. They emerged in the pantry, silent shadows inside shadows. Marcus pushed the door ajar by a sliver. The kitchen glowed in lamplight. Creed stood near the dining table coat, immaculate hands clasped loosely in front of him. Beside the far wall, a squat metal tank sat on a dolly hose, snaking along the floor toward a hole drilled in the corner boards. A small black box rested on the tank, a timer with red digital numbers. 8 minutes. Marcus's muscles drew tight like cables. 2 men flanked the room, both armed with sidearms, holstered but unsnapped. A third knelt by the baseboard, tightening a coupler on the hose. "Careful," Creed said. "Too much and the regulators will whine. We want this quiet." The man grunted, twisting the coupler another quarter turn. Mr. Hale, Creed called without looking up. "You've proven to be remarkably resourceful. I'd rather we not waste that." Marcus didn't answer. Creed smiled faintly. "You're there. Of course you are. This is your instinct to watch, from cover to assess to plan." He turned slowly, scanning the room. "The difference now is that I don't have to smoke you out. Time will do the job for me." He gestured lazily toward the tank. 0758. Once that goes off, he said, the chamber ceiling fractures, the pump house collapses, and this becomes just another unfortunate example of coastal erosion. He shrugged. "Regrettable, but legally tidy." Echo's low growl vibrated under Marcus's hand. Evan whispered, "We should call the sheriff." "Reception's spotty in the tunnel," Marcus murmured back. "By the time she's here, this house is splinters." He thought fast. 3 armed men. 1 compressor bomb. 1 timer. Creed. And Echo. Marcus closed his eyes for half a breath. In another life, another night, he'd miscalculated. An alleyway. A team pinned. A wrong call. The memory still tasted like dust and iron. This time he had a choice. He wasn't alone. He opened his eyes. "Echo," he whispered, voice, almost inaudible. "On my mark." The dog's muscles tightened. Creed sighed, as if bored by the delay. "I don't actually want you dead, Mr. Hale, but I need you neutralized. Once the land is declared unstable, I file a petition for controlled salvage rights. A few years and no one remembers it was ever yours." Marcus eased the pantry door open another inch. A floorboard creaked. Creed's head snapped toward the sound. He smiled. "There you are." Everything moved at once. Marcus kicked the pantry door outward, sending it crashing against the wall. Echo burst through the opening, a brindled streak of motion, straight toward the compressor tank. The nearest guard drew his weapon. Marcus slammed into him, shoulder first, knocking the gun from his hand. It clattered across the floor as the man wheezed. The second guard swung for Marcus's head. Marcus ducked, jabbed a fist into the man's ribs, and twisted, using the momentum to drive him into the table. The timer blinked down. Echo reached the tank and seized the hose in his jaws, teeth clamping just behind the coupler. He jerked sideways with all his strength. The metal fitting screeched as it bent. Pressure hissed through the partial seal. Creed's calm broke for the first time. "Stop that dog!" The kneeling man lunged, grabbing the hose near Echo's mouth. Echo snarled, bracing his paws, pulling harder. The coupler tore free entirely with a sharp crack. A high-pitched whine filled the room as compressed air jetted from the open valve. The tank bucked on the dolly. Idiot Creed snapped, rushing forward. "Shut it off." Marcus grabbed the nearest guard and hurled him into Creed's path. All 3 went down in a tangle of coats and boots. The timer continued ticking. The released pressure had changed the equation. The blast wouldn't fracture the chamber as planned, but if the tank ruptured here in the house, the shrapnel would be enough to tear through walls. Marcus scrambled toward the tank. Echo danced back, coughing, as the escaping air whipped dust into his face. "Back!" Marcus shouted. Echo obeyed instantly, retreating to the doorway, eyes locked on him. Marcus twisted the valve wheel with both hands. It shrieked in protest halfway between open and closed. The tank vibrated violently, jumping on the dolly. "Come on," he gritted. The wheel jerked, then spun fully shut. The whine died. Marcus exhaled, then saw the timer, still blinking. He stared. The timer wasn't wired to the valve. It connected directly to the tank body, a fail-safe detonator. "Of course," Creed said, rising slowly, wiping dust from his sleeve. "You really thought I'd trust a simple pressure trigger." He lifted a compact remote from his pocket, sleek black, a single rubberized button in the center. Echo's eyes went straight to it. Creed's thumb hovered over the button. "You can't win this," Creed said quietly. "You move, I press. The tank ruptures. Maybe you survive. The house doesn't. The tunnel certainly doesn't." He stepped closer, remote gleaming in his hand. "Walk away, Mr. Hale. Leave the land. Leave the dog. I'll make sure your name doesn't appear in the incident report at all." Marcus stood very still, breath shallow. "Walk away." Again, like before. Let the blast take the blame while he lived with it. His fingers curled into fists. Echo stood by the doorway chest, heaving gaze flicking between Marcus and Creed. His ears trembled, catching sounds. Marcus couldn't hear the faint tick of the timer, the subtle strain of metal, the distant hollow beat of waves beneath the floor. Creed's smile thinned. Time is expensive. I don't like wasting it. He took another step. I'll count to 3, he said. Then I press. He raised the remote slightly, holding it between them like an offering. 1. Marcus's heartbeat roared in his ears. 2. Echo moved. It wasn't a leap. It wasn't a reckless charge. It was a calculated sprint, low-angled, aimed not at Creed's throat but at his wrist. In 3 strides, Echo crossed the room. Creed's eyes widened, a fraction too late. Echo's jaws closed around Creed's forearm, not deep enough to tear, but hard enough to shock. Creed's hand spasmed. The remote slipped from his fingers, flipping end over end through the air. Marcus dove. Time telescoped. The remote arced toward the floor. Echo released Creed and twisted midair shoulder, slamming into Marcus's leg, shifting his trajectory by inches. Marcus's hand slapped the remote against the floor just as his finger struck the side, not the button. The device skidded under the table. Echo landed hard paws, scrambling, then regained his footing, placing himself squarely between Creed and the fallen remote. Creed swore, clutching his bleeding wrist. 2 of his men recovered and lunged forward. Echo met them head-on. He didn't bite. He collided. A living battering ram, he drove the first man backward into the wall, knocking the breath from his lungs. He spun shoulder-checking the second, sending him staggering over a chair. Marcus slid under the table, grabbed the remote, and ripped the battery compartment open with his thumb. The cell popped free and rolled across the floor. The timer on the tank kept ticking, but now it had nowhere to receive a command. Marcus surged to his feet, remote in pieces, chest burning. "Game's over," he said. Creed's eyes went cold. "For now," he said. But the front door flew open. Police hands where I can see them. Sheriff Layla Quinn, stepped-in weapon drawn, 2 deputies flanking her. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, washing the room in harsh color. Creed lifted his hands slowly, expression smoothing back into controlled calm. "Sheriff," he said, "you're just in time to witness a very unfortunate misunderstanding." Quinn's gaze swept the room, taking in the tank, the hose, Echo's bristling stance, Marcus's torn jacket, Creed's bleeding wrist. Her jaw hardened. "Looks pretty clear from here." 1 deputy cuffed the nearest guard. The other secured the man Echo had pinned. "Easy," Marcus murmured to the dog. "Let them work." Echo's breathing slowed. He stepped back, but didn't sit until Marcus's hand touched his shoulder. Quinn moved to the tank, eyes narrowing at the timer. "What is this?" "Unlicensed explosives," Marcus said. "Set to fracture the underground chamber." Evan stumbled in from the side doorway, waving the folder. "And I have records, surveys, pressure charts, proof the chamber exists, and that Creed's been trying to claim it off book for years." Quinn eyed him. "You were helping him." "I was," Evan whispered. "Not anymore." Creed's gaze cut to him like a blade. "You think 1 guilty man and a dog will outweigh a decade of my investments?" Sheriff Quinn holstered her weapon and stepped toward him. "I think a bomb under a private residence, forged deeds, and paid sabotage will play very well at the state level." She nodded to the deputies. "Read him his rights." As they cuffed Creed, he held Marcus's gaze. "This doesn't end with me," he said quietly. "The water, the chamber. Men will come after it as long as it hums." Marcus looked at Echo, who stood poised, eyes, bright ears, picking up every sound above and below. "Then they'll find it guarded," Marcus said. Creed laughed, once humorless, as they led him out into the flashing lights. The timer ticked down to 0000. Nothing happened. The tank sat silent and inert. Echo exhaled deeply and laid his head briefly against Marcus's hip. They'd held. The legal aftermath didn't unfold in one dramatic sweep. It came in waves, reports filed, evidence cataloged, the chamber recorded as a protected geological and cultural site. The rezoning vote was suspended pending state review. Creed's assets were frozen under investigation. Marcus gave statement after statement. So did Evan. So did Quinn. But the loudest testimony came from the land itself, the chamber mapped by ethical surveyors, its existence undeniable, its fragility obvious. Through it all, Echo stayed at Marcus's side. On the day the state board ruled that Hawkshade Point would remain under personal stewardship and ecological protection, Marcus read the notice on the porch with the same quiet focus he'd once used to study mission briefings. Echo sat beside him, watching his face. Marcus reached down, fingers curling into the dog's ruff. "We did it," he said softly. Echo thumped his tail, then lifted his head toward the pump house ears, twitching as if listening for the hum underground. It was still there, but now it sounded less like a warning, more like a heartbeat. A storm might come again. Men like Creed might appear with new signatures and schemes. But for the first time in years, Marcus knew where he would stand when they did, on this porch, by this dog, over that hidden light. And he wouldn't run. Not anymore. Spring settled slowly across Hawkshade Point, softening the edges the winter storm had carved deep into the land. Snow retreated in small, shining rivulets. Buds swelled on the branches. The earth exhaled warmth again. And the house, Marcus's house, seemed to breathe with it. He woke early now, not because he feared footsteps on gravel, but because he liked the quiet just before sunrise. The kind of quiet that let him hear the faint rustle of Echo stretching beside the bed, the faint hum beneath the floorboards that vibrated like a memory, and the first birds testing the cold morning air. Most days, Marcus walked the perimeter with Echo at his side. It had become a ritual boots through dew, Echo weaving ahead with the careful measured pace of a working dog who finally understood the job he'd been given. Every so often, he would pause ears, angled toward the pump house, as if greeting an old friend stirring underground. Marcus would pause too, resting a hand briefly on the dog's flank. "We're still here," he'd murmur. Echo's tail would sweep low, slow content. The state survey team finished weeks ago. Their final report recommended permanent conservation status for the chamber. Too delicate, they'd said. Too historically significant. Marcus hadn't argued. Neither had Sheriff Quinn, who stood by him during the announcement without stepping into the spotlight herself. Not every victory needs a parade, she'd told him afterward. Marcus had smiled. No, some just need time. Life returned in small ways. Evan helped repair the broken fence posts. He spoke little, worked much, and kept his head down, but he stayed, and that was something. Some evenings he sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee while Echo snuffled through the fresh grass nearby. They didn't talk about creed or court hearings or guilt. They didn't need to. A local historian visited twice, taking careful notes on the chamber and offering more questions than answers. It isn't treasure, she'd concluded, closing her notebook, but it's priceless. Neighbors who once watched Marcus with suspicion now stopped by with pies or tools or invitations to the spring market. The isolation he had carried like armor began to loosen thread by thread. He wasn't repaired, not entirely. But he was rooted, now held by more than obligation. One afternoon, a boy of maybe 7 wandered up the driveway, backpack slung crooked on his shoulders. He froze when Echo trotted over, tail raised, ears forward. The boy lifted his hands in worry. "He doesn't bite," Marcus called from the porch. "Promise," the boy whispered. Echo sat immediately, head tilted with gentle patience. Marcus nodded. "Promise." The boy approached, hesitant, then braver. Echo leaned forward and pressed his nose into the boy's palm. The boy laughed, surprised, delighted, then looked up at Marcus. "Is he guarding something?" Marcus considered the question. Echo glanced toward the pump house. The earth beneath it hummed faintly. "Yeah," Marcus said finally. "He is." What Marcus smiled softly. "Home." The boy nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then he waved goodbye and jogged down the road, the afternoon sun catching the edges of his hair like a small crown of light. Later, as dusk fell, Marcus stood on the cliff path overlooking the sea. The horizon burned in quiet gold. Echo lay beside him, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The wind carried the scent of new grass and salt. "You know," Marcus said, voice low, "I used to think purpose ended. That once the uniform came off, everything after was just driftwood." Echo's ear flicked, listening. "But maybe purpose isn't something you lose," Marcus continued. "Maybe it waits." He looked toward the pump house, where the faintest glow pulsed through the cracks, reflected sunrise from the chamber below, like the earth returning a little of the light it had been given. Echo rose and pressed his shoulder against Marcus's leg. They stayed like that, quiet, steady, rooted as the last sliver of sun slipped beneath the water. A man, a dog, and a hum beneath their feet. Not a beacon, not a warning, just a promise kept. And in that moment, Marcus understood. Some homes aren't built, they're awakened.